Yeah, and I would call the other panelists. Professor Nakicenovic, please come back and join us. We also have Wali Zhang. He's president of Westec in Wuxi, China, and the first R20 member in China. We have, okay, he's coming, Gernot Grimm, head of staff group for technology transfer and security research at the Federal Ministry for Transport, Innovation and Technology in Austria, who is cooperating with the Chinese city of Nanchang. We have Walter Koren, he's the CEO of Advantage Austria, Austrian Economic Chambers. We have Simon Bransfield-Garth, the CEO of Azuri Technologies. Okay. We have Paul Odili, Manager of Communications of Governor of Delta State, Nigeria. Very warm welcome to you too. And we have Kim Jae-hyo, who is the Secretary General of the Association of Northeast Asia Regional Governments, which we will call NEA, we said, right? Because it's easier for us. But before we start this very big panel, I would like to bring in the audience again for a first question. Now you have a multiple choice. The first question is, 6.5 billion people currently populate the Earth. By 2030, there will probably be 8.2 billion. The energy consumption will also rise. By how much do you think? Please choose one of the following. A, 30%, B, 50%, C, 70%. What do you think? Few people here will know, but what does our audience think? Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's the correct answer. Yeah, so well-informed audience here. As we've already heard, a very big part of this energy increase is in China, and this is why I would like to start in China with Wali Zhang, the president of Westec, as I said. It's actually a company promoting alternative energy, and I would like to ask you to introduce what you are doing to us.
Good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. I have the one small slide for showing this. I have to introduce as the first partner of R20 in China. We are focused for the energy saving and green energy. We start from 40% energy CFL to 80% energy saving for LED, then for 100% energy saving. This, everybody would be like to see this logo, but 10 years before, my daughters asked me the question. He said, "Baba, you made a mistake. This is, my teacher told me 1 + 1 is 2. Now she understands what is the 1 + 1 is 11. You know, everybody, this 11 is Chinese chopstick. Am I right? For Asian people, always used to get the food. Without chopsticks, cannot get the food. So 1 + 1 is chopstick first. The second, 1 + 1 is teamwork, actually. I read one book, but it's Chinese. It was published. This is 1 + 1 is teamwork. We should working together as team. Everybody know his own strong point, but we need working more close. You know, this is one, this is another one. So we have to working close. This is a team. Working more close, this is a team.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but can you just briefly explain what
Okay.
you're doing exactly?
Okay. 100 plus 1 is 200. It means any other one is key person. We know one key person, it means we know 100%. Minus 100 minus 1 is 0. It's one small mistake can break down the total system. So this is now, as the member, we start with actually we doing this several years before, and the major we do the solar energy for the worldwide. We made a project we want to show this is tools. We make the worldwide, we export to 58 countries, and we have 23 countries, the partner, including Austria also. And we have doing for the solar renewable energy to saving the cost and saving the CO2 and for the coal also. We doing for in different in Japan, in worldwide, so Korea, Mexico, such kind of things. I think you see everybody this morning we're talking. This channel is foggy, very much foggy. PM 2.5, PM 2.10 now. So as the channel company, we feel very bad. We need to working together and try to make the sky more clear, make the water more clean, make the air more fresh. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your introduction. So we heard you're not just working in China, you are also exporting your technology, which is very fascinating. I'm sure we will talk about it later. But I will stick with Asia for a bit. Mr. Kim, according to you, what needs to be done in Asia to combat climate change? And to get a handle on energy consumption, of course.
Well, thank you for kind introductions. I introduce very shortly about NEAR, my associations, which means the Association of Northeast Asia Regional Government. So in short, NEAR means just near, neighbor. And it is the largest inter-regional organization in East Asia with the participation of 71 provincial level regional government in 6 countries, and which are China, Japan, Korea, and Mongolia, and Siberia and Russia, representing almost 446 million citizens. But we are very actively involved on these renewable energy sectors in the regions. But I like to touch on very shortly about each member regions. The global warming and climate change brought about ecosystem change in Mongolia, so that Mongolia started to have national level action for the climate change since the year 2000. The pace of global warming in Mongolia is 3 times faster than any other part of the world. The desertification and the water shortage are speed up due to reduced rainfall. And the number of days so-called sand dust occur is increased 3 times during the same period. These ecosystem changes give also very badly and a serious effect on neighbored region, just like Korea or Japan. And Russia, Siberian part of Russia, is one of the regions whose temperatures are rapidly rising compared to that of other countries worldwide, especially Altai region's annual average glaciers melting is 10 or 15 meters. Permafrost is also rapidly melting. So Russia actively engaged in establishing and integrated monitoring systems in the region for climate change. But China, as emerging economies, China strengthened the development of renewable energy source in order to cope with climate change and make use of this plan as a restructuring model for their economy. At the same time, China strongly promotes energy-saving policies, especially China select investment and support for alternative energy as a regional government strategies. So investment for energy has risen almost 260% within recent 5 years' time, but they are emphasizing the enlargement of the capacity only. For also, the regulation of carbon emissions has created opportunity for China to enhance energy efficiency and generate low carbon energies. But China still needs higher rate of economic growth, which means energy consumption is increasing all the time. So China must need so-called decoupling of green growth are needed. Korea and Japan are well advanced in global action for climate change. Especially Korea selected the concept of green growth as a national policy for the first time in the world. Changes energy system to reduce greenhouse gas as green growth policies and aim to stop and reverse environmental degradation in general and to transform energy production process. So to sum up, the near member countries' renewable energy policy coping with the climate change is mostly centralized. So decentralization is required for the region for more active responding to climate change. And R20 initiatives are required to be introduced to the regions in order for member regions to positively and independently cope with the climate change. And also, small-scale investment is required for less densely populated areas, such as Mongolia or Siberian Russia. So technology and capitals and experience are all needed. All this will provide regional leaders with opportunities. So I hope all the audience can well aware of this Northeast Asia regions, and it can help very fruitful result for the regions if you are actively involved in the region in Northeast Asia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would stay with China and on my right side, Mr. Grimm. I think you can talk to us about a concrete example. Sie führen ein Projekt durch in der Stadt Nanchang, ein Technologietransfer. Wie genau sieht das aus?
Die strategische Aufgabe unseres Ministeriums, des Ministeriums für Verkehr, Technologie und Innovation ist es, strategischen Infrastrukturtechnologie-Export zu unterstützen und Rahmenbedingungen dafür zu schaffen. Im Zuge dieser Bemühungen gibt es bilaterale Beziehungen zu China, in erster Linie was die Planungskommission betrifft. Diese Planungskommission hat 12 chinesische Städte ausgesucht, in denen man konkrete Umsetzungsprojekte auch finanziert, deren Ziel es ist, Low-Carbon-Cities zu machen. Eine dieser Städte ist die Stadt Nanchang in Mittelchina, 200 Kilometer westlich von Shanghai gelegen. Ungefähr 5 Millionen Einwohner, also eine chinesische mittlere Stadt. Insofern für uns strategisch sehr interessant, weil sie den Fokus chinesischen Interesses im Bereich CO2-Reduktionsvermeidung ausgelöst hat. Wir haben eine bilaterale Beziehung sowohl mit der Planungskommission, was die Entwicklung dieser Stadt betrifft, als auch eine bilaterale Beziehung zu der Stadt selbst, deren Ziel es ist, ganz konkrete Projekte nicht nur zu identifizieren, sondern auch zu begleiten. Das heißt also, dass wir im Wege unserer Strukturen vor Ort Botschaft, Außenhandelsstelle, auch unser eigenes Technologiebüro an der österreichischen Botschaft konkrete Projekte identifiziert haben, und zwar heute 2 konkrete Projekte existieren, in denen wir zeigen können, welchen Effekt CO2-Reduktion auf die Umwelt in einer Großagglomeration wie Nanchang haben kann. Zu diesem Zweck wurde eine Toolbox entwickelt, die durchgeführt wurde im Auftrag der Stadt Nanchang und auch auf Kosten der Stadt Nanchang, was nicht ganz unwichtig war, vom österreichischen Austrian Institute of Technology in Seibersdorf. Und anhand dieser Toolbox konnten wir dann 2 konkrete Projekte identifizieren. Eines für ein grünes Spital inklusive technologischer Ausstattung und eines für ein Bündel von Maßnahmen für die Flüssigmachung des sehr oder relativ unkoordinierten Verkehrsaufkommens in der Stadt. Das heißt, durchgängige Ampelsysteme zu schalten, Verkehrsleitsysteme, auch Parkraumbewirtschaftungssysteme anzudenken. Und diese Projekte sind ganz konkrete, bezifferbar auf den CO2-Reduktionsgehalt, konkrete Projekte, die im Wege bilateraler Finanzierungen von Österreich auf kommerzieller Basis gemacht werden, realisiert werden und zeigen sollen an einem Lighthouse-Projekt, nämlich in Nanchang, was die österreichische Umwelttechnologie kommerziell in einem dramatisch wachsenden Energiemarkt wie China leisten kann. Das sind unsere Erfahrungsberichte auch aus Nanchang und wir freuen uns nicht nur über neue Projekte, sondern wir freuen uns insbesondere darauf, diese Erfahrungen nicht nur in China, sondern auf allen unseren strategischen Märkten, dort nämlich, wo man strategische Infrastruktur zur Vermeidung von CO2-Reduktionen braucht, darstellen zu können.
Herzlichen
Dankeschön.
Dank. Herr Koren, I'll leave it up to you if you speak English or German. Aber da wir gerade in Österreich sind, ich fand das sehr interessant, dass wir aus China gehört haben, da gibt es eine Firma, die exportiert ihre Technologie auch in andere Länder. Gleichzeitig erwarten sich österreichische Unternehmen in puncto Umwelttechnologie große Profite, gerade in Ländern wie China. Was sind denn jetzt die tatsächlichen Trends?
Honoring the audience, I will talk in English. Yeah, we were talking a lot of China, and I remember very well when I met the Chinese Minister of Environmental Affairs with a group of Austrian entrepreneurs. He mentioned and put us at the same time the question who was and is the most important source of energy for China. And then at the same time he gave the answer, this is energy efficiency. So it is one of the major points. A second point is the need for decentralization. I see the challenge for the developed world to find the optimal mix of energy sources in the short, medium, and long term. For the developing world, as Mr. Rogers explained so brilliantly, is giving and finding the access to energy in all the remote areas all over the world, which are really vast regions still to be tapped. Another challenge is to decouple the economic growth from the energy consumption growth. You put the question at the beginning in this regard. This is a major challenge. And let me give you some example of China. 70% of energy consumption in China are contributed only to industry. And among the industry, the four most energy-intense industry sectors, steel, non-ferrous metals, chemistry, and building materials, use up to 40% of the nation's energy. So when we think about that, we know it's all about technology. It's all about innovation and a lot of invention to be done. And there comes to my mind, of course, the technological cooperation. And I think among many companies in the world, Austrian companies have state-of-the-art, really in niches and in some major sectors. It is not only true, of course, for China, and a major trend, what I see also is, one, there's a paradigm shift. Renewable energies are not seen anymore as a pure idealistic new frontier of green movements. No, it is a necessity to include them, and I see another trend geographically, that there's no longer only one or certain world region in the focus, but there's the whole world in the focus. And this is why I think, I have to say also Austrian, that Arne is very right to talk about a momentum and about a movement. So we see the whole world coming from the grassroots, from the regions, from the companies, from all these drivers. And I see a lot of potentials. And when I talk to Austrian companies also in this forum, I can see that there is a big offer of Austrian state-of-the-art technology, which we have connect with. I would like to mention, maybe if you allow me, maybe three. There's the solar thermal technology of Austrian companies. We build solar thermal projects, for example, of the sailing compound for the Beijing Summer Olympics back in the year 2008. An Austrian company produced the biggest solar thermal plant for the biggest female university in the world in Saudi Arabia for 40,000 students. So in Austria, this is a middle-sized village. One field. The other field is looking into biodiesel. There's Austrian state-of-the-art technology out of the grease trap, the biggest plant, by the way, in China of multi-feedstock, has got Austrian technology to get out the grease from the feedstock and to transform it as an ingredient for biodiesel nearby. And the third is a new technology being developed within the hydro sector, which is called tidal energy development. And in hydropower, an Austrian company is #1 in the world, fortunately. And there is a pilot project up north in Norway, and there will be a pilot or maybe more pilot projects, maybe together with our US colleagues or other colleagues, definitely with the Chilean colleagues, to put a pilot tidal wave plant in the southern part of Chile. So the challenge will be how to transport the energy generated in the far south, in one region, to the production centers in the north.
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe we'll find the time later to talk about the fact that also, well, that European companies are not so happy nowadays that the Chinese are flooding our market with solar panels, aren't they? Or maybe you can give me a comment to that right away. A brief one.
Of course, it's competition all over the world, and we cannot stop competition. We have to enter into more fields of technological cooperation, and we have to cooperate, especially with countries which are at the edge of technology, which maybe are one step ahead, as many Austrians are. And of course, you have to cooperate with countries which are at the same time the biggest markets in the world. So we cannot only think that the Chinese would import the whole technology and consume it, but we should be aware and have to be aware that they have their own production sites, and this will be, I think, the trend to go on, and we have to face this trend and not just stop the trend.
Okay. One of the biggest growing markets of the Chinese is the African continent. I'm very glad to have a representative from Africa here as well. Mr. Odili, as a subnational government, how are you going into the renewable energy opportunities?
Thank you very much. I represent Delta State. Delta is a subnational government in Nigeria. As you know, Nigeria has 36 states, so we are one of the 36 states. Now, I need to also, by way of introduction, let you know that we are at the early stages of our move towards embracing clean technology, renewable energy, and all that. But I also need to put a few things in context, which is this. One, Nigeria, as you know, it's is an oil-producing country. It's a commodities economy. Our export of crude oil is about 2.5%, 2.5 million a day of crude oil production. Of that amount, 30% of it is from Delta State, meaning we're exposed to carbon intensity of gas flare and oil spill and all kinds of damages that the oil production does. Now, it's with that in mind that the administration of Governor Udwan decided to diversify our energy economy. Because one of the challenges with oil production is that it's also an enclave economy that's limited forward and backward linkage. People don't really get the benefits of that in terms of jobs, in terms of access to their energy needs. So renewable energy represents for us an opportunity to have greater access to electricity and to also drive our energy needs. Now, I also need to put a few other things in context for you to understand this. One of which is that as we speak today, 60% of our people have access to energy, to electricity. So that means 40 doesn't. That's very key. You talked about microgrids. Now, that's very important because it will also help to cover the energy gap that exists as we speak today. Now, one of the first steps we've taken in our diversification process is this sort of engagement. We have deeply engaged with R20. We've also, in partnership with IEA, developed our Renewable Energy Option Report, fantastic report, which gives a clear view of the steps that we need to take. And that report is ready. The next step is to begin the process of implementing our strategies towards clean technology and renewable energy. That's where we are at this present time. And we hope that very rapidly, although we're a subnational government, we are also inspired by the California model, where Governor Schwarzenegger, by his interest in clean energy, was able to put it on national agenda of the US. Our aspiration is to start off the process in Delta State and hopefully bring it to the national agenda of the country and perhaps even Africa. That's our strategy and that's our aspiration. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to bring in the audience again with another question. As you have these nice appliances in front of you, why not use them? The second question I would like to ask you. Energy consumption will rise by 50% by the year 2030. What part of this projected rise is attributable to emerging economies, mainly China, India, Brazil, the Middle East? Choose one of the following, please. A, it's 25%, B, 38%, C, 50%, or D, 66% of the energy rise will be due to the emerging economies. Yeah, that's the correct answer. And let me now ask Simon Bransfeld-Garth of Azuri Technologies. How are you dealing with it?
Well, thank you very much. So Azuri was fortunate enough to be named by Nobel Sustainability as their supported clean tech company for 2012. And Azuri is focused completely on serving the needs of base of the pyramid customers in emerging markets. So these are customers who are typically in rural environments who have no access to electricity at all. And as we've heard, there are about 1.3 billion of those around the world today. Those customers are double disadvantaged. Not only do they not have access to electricity, but the alternatives they have to pay for are astronomically expensive. So if I give you an example, if I go and charge my mobile phone in Kenya, it typically costs 20 cents to charge my mobile phone. At home, I pay about 10 to 15 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. The equivalent energy cost of 20 cents to charge my phone is about $50 per kilowatt hour, just completely out of all proportion to the normal cost of grid electricity. So the business case for providing other sources of electricity in Africa is completely overwhelming. The problem is not the technology, the problem is how do you actually get it into the customer's hands affordably? The governments in general can't afford the sort of investments that occurred in the United States in the 30s and 40s, and instead we need to find different ways of doing it. And so Azuri has combined mobile phone technology and solar technology so that instead of individuals having to buy a solar home system, they in effect rent that solar home system. And the cost of renting that solar home system is about half the cost that the users were previously spending on a combination of kerosene and mobile phone charging. So in effect, users get solar power and they actually save money. It's not just cost neutral, they actually save money as they go forward. So I think one of the things that's really interesting for us is if you think about how technology was traditionally rolled out into emerging markets, it was a case of taking last year's technology, giving it a new paint job and putting it out into Africa and trying to extend life from those products. And what we're finding is exactly the reverse innovation that Jim talked about, where actually now the very latest technology is being used in Africa, and that will probably find its way back into the West. And I'll give you two examples. One is that there is a great demand in all across emerging markets for access to television. It turns out that it is cheaper to provide somebody with the latest generation, low voltage, low power, color LCD TV than it is to put in place the increased amount of solar power you would need to drive a last generation black and white television. So now we're using the very latest technology in order to drive innovation in Africa and get products which are appropriate. But the second one is that you can start to look at some of your basic assumptions about electricity. So right in the very earliest days of electricity, there was a long debate between Edison and Westinghouse about whether you should have AC or DC power. Why do we have AC power? Well, we have AC power because we need to be able to send electricity a long way. If you're generating your electricity in solar panels 2 meters above your head, you don't need AC power. You can come up with a completely new paradigm where you have DC-powered houses driving DC-powered devices, DC-powered lights, televisions, computers, all these other devices. And it's amazing the amount of efficiency you gain by not having to transform electricity up to AC and then back down again to individual devices. And that's a technology that I think is going to be pioneered in emerging markets and then will progressively find its way back into the Western world. So there's a couple of examples of where emerging markets can actually lead the new thinking in energy simply because energy is so expensive and therefore has to be treated as a much more valuable resource than something you would use to boil a kettle to make a cup of coffee. And I think that's tremendously encouraging.
Thank you very much for this very interesting. I was actually about to ask you something because it was very interesting what you just said, leading the way for Western countries. I mean, we spoke a lot about efficiency in emerging markets now. But let's come to the US. I mean, the energy supplies in the US are notoriously insufficient, at least how we can see here. The infrastructure is in a dismal state. Wouldn't there be lots to gain also from more efficiency in the States, for example?
I really actually believe the most environmentally benign plant you can build is the one you don't build. So efficiency, we think of it as the fifth fuel, but it's really the first choice and the smartest investment to reduce demand. For instance, in Charlotte, where I live, we have a program there for the center city to reduce demand in 5 years, 20% in all the buildings in the downtown area. That's just one example of hundreds of examples of cities and communities across the country trying to work hard to have greater productivity gains in the use of electricity. A statistic that I will share with you is that in our company, our per residential use has been declining for a decade, even though there's been more gadgets, more plug-in devices in the home, because we've got tougher appliance standards, tougher standards for HVAC systems, and as they replace them, we see a decline. Because electricity is so cheap in the US, we do not believe that behavioral change will be as successful as the deployment of technology, because electricity is so back of mind. To deploy technologies that allow for productivity gains in the use of electricity needs to be back of mind also. And so we believe that let me give you one other statistic that helps make this point. In the 60s, for every 1% our GDP grew, the demand for electricity grew about 5%. And by the 90s, for every 1% our GDP grew, it grew about 1%. And now we're on the ragged edge of decoupling the growth in our economy from the growth in the demand of electricity. That's a good place.
But that's maybe because you're not producing so many concrete things anymore. Is that possible, that also the economy as such has changed?
I think the economy...
So less factories, more offices?
I think that's right. I mean, the character of the economy has changed as we move to IT and the information economy. So the character of our GDP has changed, but the efficiency. Our company alone spent $9 billion, and we're retiring almost 50 old, high-emitting, inefficient coal plants. So this is going on around the country, and it's not just in California. And by the way, there are different models in different states, and the genius of having these different pilots in the different states, that what we're finding are there are different ways to approach the problem and not one size fits all. And so innovation comes when you have competing ideas, competing pilots in different areas, and that robust activity is going on across the country.
Okay. I would like to ask you, Professor Nakicenovic, I got it correct. Is the West actually really doing enough, especially the United States, doing enough to get more energy efficient?
Well, that's a good question, and I think we have already discussed it in this panel. And I would like to go to something what Simon said just a minute ago, and that is a new paradigm is required for that. I mean, efficiency has been the low-lying fruit for decades. We knew that that's the best way. It's always better to save than to build new. And yet it is not happening. And I think it's not happening because we don't have the new paradigm that you were mentioning about. And I would go even further. There is a child's game that many of you might be familiar with. It's called leapfrogging. Basically, one child jumps over the next one. And this is exactly what we need to do when we talk about in the context of the developing countries. The developing countries have to emerge, in my view, on the new development path that does not mimic what we have done so inefficiently in the Industrial Revolution. We need a post-industrial revolution, and I think that's to a large extent efficiency revolution. And that's possible to the new type of technologies that we have been discussing. We have them. We don't lack the technologies. I think we lack the understanding how the systems will emerge, and I think we lack the private initiative. So my call is developing countries have to leapfrog, and the leapfrogging is the the efficiency revolution. And if we do that, then I think the path to low carbon future is much more likely and feasible. And also the access story. At the end of the day, efficiency is a key. Economists have this concept of a rebound effect. If you bring efficiency, the consumption goes up. Well, that's exactly what we need in the places where people don't have access, and to lower the cost. So rebound effect is not something we should be scared of. We should be only scared if rebound effect occurs in US or in Europe. But I think for the developing regions, that's the right thing to do. So what is the problem? I think the big problem is that we actually have to do it ourselves, because the efficiency is in the buildings, it's in the mobility. I was delighted to see that we have electric vehicles associated with this conference, the Nissan Renault cars. We have also just purchased an electric car, and I'm really looking forward to the experience of being more efficient, and clearly we have to do that in the buildings. So for that, I think we have to be the pioneers. So let me just conclude by observing that I think that this is also the biggest risk that we have. Not enough time for change. If we go to the natural diffusion problems, processes of adopting new technologies, we are talking about 30, 40 years. And then what I was quite disappointed about, we have the results like a minute ago, that energy demand will grow by 50%. I hope that that's a future we can avoid, and it will become counterfactual, that the demand will not increase so much because we will have the efficiency revolution.
But I would still like to pose one question. I don't know whoever, I mean, you more or less answered it already. There's also a war of beliefs whether or not nuclear power is good or bad. I mean, in China, it's considered to be alternative energy. We would never call it alternative energy anywhere in Europe, certainly not in Austria, because alternative for us is green and renewable and whatever. So, Professor, is nuclear energy a good replacement for coal, or would you say this is something we should bypass?
Yeah, I think we all have our preferences. You know, the world is complex. Let me just, before I answer your question, say that we need a portfolio everywhere. We need everything. Now, nuclear power in this country is not the option. We know that. It's not the option in Germany either. At least that's the social will. In many other places in the world, it will be the option. And we need that diversity. For markets that grow very fast, nuclear power might come into question. As you know, there are many difficulties with nuclear proliferation and so on that need to be resolved. But my personal conclusion is, to answer your question, I do personally prefer nuclear to coal, because of the climate problem. But that's just my personal preference. I know in many other places you might prefer to build a coal power plant, and that's how it should be. I think we need local solutions, but what we have, I think, concluded here is essential. It has to be efficient, and it has to be compatible with the big change that's ahead of us.
Okay. I suppose you agree, right?
And if you're serious about climate, you need to be serious about nuclear. If you look at China, they're building 25 new nuclear plants, yet they lead the world in solar panel production as well as in wind turbine production. So again, it's really a balanced approach. Different places have different desires and different capabilities. We're not all blessed like Austria to have so much hydro, but in the areas we don't, we need to deploy. But let me, if I may, quickly add to what Simon said, because he made a really important point. And that is this use of a DC grid. The DC grid has been deployed in India. They're coupling battery technologies with it. And that really is going to be the efficient way forward and might well be, as I said earlier, deployed in developed worlds. But the last point is this. What we've found in these rural communities, it is women that are really critical. Not women as the use of this, but where they've been using kerosene and they can replace it with solar lanterns, for instance, it's one, cheaper. But secondly, women should be the ones, we think, to be the distributors, to do the maintenance, and to lead the effort of the deployment of these technologies, because they tend to, end of the day, produce better results in these rural communities. That's been our experience.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, unfortunately, we are running out of time again. So all we have time for is one last question for the audience. Which effective strategy approach would you prefer in order to implement a clean and efficient energy system for emerging economies? You can choose one of the following. A top-down approach, integrated planning approaches, for example, low-carbon cities and so on, or bottom-up approach, regionally adapted energy solutions, citizens' initiatives, model communities, projects, and so on and so forth. Let's see. So again, the politicians don't win. It comes from the people themselves, says the audience. I actually assumed that. Thank you, gentlemen, for this very interesting round. Well, I think we heard again that efficiency is key. We heard some very concrete, very interesting examples, and we learned that in emerging economies, you actually have the chance to implement new technologies because you just leave out the mistakes, we can say, which we made in the West. And we heard at the end that women should lead, which is probably true for many fields, but unfortunately doesn't happen so often. As you can see, the only woman up here was me, and I was the one asking questions, so maybe that will change too. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to the lunch break, which will last until 2 o'clock. Enjoy your lunch, and see you in the afternoon. Thank you.